The air in the Silver Creek saloon was thick with the ghosts of bad decisions. It smelled like sweat, stale smoke, and the kind of cheap whiskey that burns all the way down. This was a place men came to die a little bit at a time, to forget the faces of their wives and the weight of their sins. In a corner so deep in shadow it was almost a part of the night, Samuel Harrov sat watching. He didn't move. He didn't speak. His stillness was a living thing, a predator in a room full of dying prey. At 45, Sam was built like an oak tree that had weathered 100 storms. His wealth was quiet, worn into the creases of his leather boots and the calm in his eyes. His ranch, the Harrov spread, was legendary. It bred champion horses that sold for fortunes, but none of that could fill the silence in his sprawling, empty house. He had no wife, no child, just the wind howling through the eaves, and a memory that cut deeper than any knife. A scar, hidden beneath his belt, was a daily reminder of a promise he could never fulfill. A promise of fatherhood, stolen from him by a corral post and a cruel twist of fate 13 years ago. So he sat here, in this pit of noise, because the quiet at home was too loud. His eyes were locked on one man, Vernon Clay. Vernon was everything Sam wasn't: loud, filthy. His face was a blotchy red map of failure, and his oily hair clung to his forehead like he was sweating out his last ounce of dignity. He laughed like a man who was already screaming inside and slammed his cards on the table as if they'd personally wronged him. He was drowning in desperation, and he was trying to drag everyone down with him. For hours, the game had churned on. Sam barely spoke. Vernon never shut up. "Must get awful lonely out on that big ranch of yours, Harrov," Vernon sneered, his words slurring together. "Bet the only thing warming your bed at night is a pile of money." A few broken men snickered. Most looked away. Sam didn't even blink. He just watched. Waited. The pot grew. The tension coiled tighter and tighter, a rattlesnake ready to strike. Soon, Vernon had nothing left. Just a rusty lighter, a few coins, and the wild, frantic look of a man who'd reached the end of his rope and was ready to jump. That's when he did it. "My last bet," Vernon slurred, shoving his chair back with a grin full of broken teeth. "She's worth more than all this paper anyway." He reached behind him and dragged a girl into the light. She was a wisp of a thing, maybe 14. Her dress was a hand-me-down from a life she'd never get to live. Her hair was a tangled mess, and her eyes, God, her eyes. They weren't pleading. They weren't asking for help. They were just empty, trembling on the edge of nothing. "My stepdaughter," Vernon announced, his greasy hand clamping down on her shoulder like a shackle. "Win the hand. She's yours." The saloon went dead silent. The piano player's hands froze over the keys. The laughter died in men's throats. Someone coughed, a dry, nervous sound that echoed in the sudden tomb. No one moved. No one spoke. This was a line no one had ever seen crossed. Sam's eyes dropped to the cards in his hand. Queens over eights. A full house. He looked back at the girl. She stood there, perfectly still. It wasn't the stillness of fear. It was the stillness of a creature that had learned the only way to survive was to pretend it wasn't alive at all. He felt the room watching him, judging him, daring him. He laid his cards down, slow, deliberate. Vernon whooped, a raw, ugly sound of relief. "Take her!" he laughed, shoving the girl forward. "Hell, take her and good riddance." No one clapped. No one cheered. Sam didn't say a word. He stood, shrugged off his heavy wool coat, and walked toward the girl. She flinched as he got closer, her body bracing for a blow that had probably landed 1,000 times before. He didn't touch her. He just held out the coat. "Put this on," he said. His voice was low, dry as dust. She hesitated, her eyes darting from his face to the coat. Then she obeyed, slipping her thin arms into the warm sleeves. Sam turned and walked toward the swinging saloon doors. He didn't look back. He didn't have to. He knew she would follow. The doors creaked shut behind them, sealing the saloon in its own filth and leaving them alone in the cold August wind. He helped her onto his horse, his hands careful, deliberate. She didn't look at him. She just held on to the saddle horn like it was the only solid thing in the world. They rode out of town, under a sky bruised purple with clouds. The only sound was the steady clop of hooves on the hard-packed dirt. Sam's mind wasn't spinning. It was calculating. What had he just done? He hadn't been looking for a child. He wasn't a man built for comfort or conversation. He was a man built of silence and fences. But the look in her eyes, the way she'd stood there as if she were a piece of furniture being sold off. He couldn't leave her in that hell. He couldn't. He had seen that look before, and he had failed to act. Never again. As the long white fences of his ranch came into view, a decision settled in his soul, hard and heavy as granite. He had brought her out of the fire. Now he had to build a world where she would never get burned again. He helped her down from the horse. "This is home," he said, not to her, but to the wind. She followed him inside, into the vast, quiet house. The hearth was cold. The air was still. But as the girl stepped over the threshold, a ghost carrying a wound, something in the old house shifted. Sam Harov didn't know it yet. He thought he had just won a poker hand, but he had just started a war. The next morning, the sun bled across the horizon, but it didn't touch the chill inside the Harov ranch house. Sam found her in the kitchen, a small, hunched shape at the edge of the massive oak table. She had his coat wrapped around her like armor, her knees pulled up to her chest. Beside her, a bowl of oatmeal sat untouched, and next to the bowl was a straw doll, its button eyes staring at nothing. She didn't look up when he entered. Her tangled hair was a curtain hiding her face from the world. Sam stopped in the doorway, a feeling of helplessness washing over him. He could break a wild stallion, stare down a charging bull. But this child, she was a different kind of wild, a different kind of broken. "You should eat," he said, his voice quiet. She didn't move. Her only response was to tighten her grip on the straw doll. Sam walked past her and poured himself a coffee, leaning against the counter. He watched her out of the corner of his eye. She was like a bird with a broken wing, ready to flutter away in panic at the slightest move. "You got a name?" he asked the silence. Her lips parted, a tiny, almost invisible movement, but no sound came out. It was as if her voice was a currency she couldn't afford to spend. He nodded once, accepting the silence. "Finish your food," he said, turning for the door. "I'll be out with the horses." He needed the familiar rhythm of work, feed the horses, check the fences, the simple, honest labor that didn't ask questions and didn't require answers. It was a language he understood. When he came back hours later, the oatmeal was gone. It was a start. But the girl was gone too. He found her in the barn. She'd climbed up into the hayloft, curled into a tight ball, the straw doll clutched to her chest. She had found a dark corner, a place to disappear. "There's a bed inside," Sam said, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. "A real one. You don't have to sleep in the hay." She didn't respond. Her face was a pale oval in the dusty light filtering through the slats of the barn wall. He understood that look. It was the look of an animal that has only ever known the sting of a whip. It expected every hand to be a fist. She didn't trust him. He hadn't expected her to. "You're safe here," he said, his voice softer than he intended. "No one is going to hurt you again." For a second, something flickered in her eyes. Not hope, not yet. It was more like confusion, as if safety was a foreign language he couldn't comprehend. That evening he tried again. He lit a fire in the main hearth, filling the cold house with a flickering warmth. Upstairs, in the guest room that hadn't been used in over a decade, he laid out fresh linens and a quilt his wife had made. The scent of cedar and lavender rose from the fabric, a ghost of a life he had buried long ago. He ignored the ache in his chest. This wasn't about him. He went back to the barn. She was still there, a small shadow in the loft. "Come on," he said, keeping his voice gentle. I made up the room for you." She didn't move. He climbed the ladder, slow and steady, stopping a few feet away from her. "It's yours. No one will bother you. You don't have to sleep in the dirt anymore." She finally looked at him, her eyes wide with a caution so deep it was painful to see. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, clutching the doll tighter. "All right," Sam said softly, backing down the ladder. "The door's open, if you change your mind." He didn't sleep that night. He sat in his leather chair by the fire, listening to the house groan around him. He thought about that poker game, the way Vernon had shoved her forward, the empty look in her eyes. It wasn't just a sick feeling in his gut. It was a cold, hard anger. He could give her a roof and food, but how did you fix something broken on the inside? How did you heal a soul? Sam Harrive was a man who fixed fences and tamed horses. He didn't know the first thing about fixing a person. Sometime after midnight, a sound drifted from the barn. A whisper. He moved silently across the yard, the moonlight painting everything in shades of silver and black. He crept to the barn door and listened. He climbed the ladder, his steps as quiet as a cat's. She was sitting up in the hay, whispering to the straw doll. The words were too soft to make out, but the rhythm was clear. It was a story, a secret, a prayer. Her small shoulders trembled with the effort of each word. She was telling the doll something she couldn't tell anyone else. Sam watched for a long moment, an invisible spectator to her lonely ritual. Then he backed away, just as silently as he had come. He returned to the house. The image of her hunched over that doll burned into his mind. This wasn't just about a traumatized girl. That doll. It wasn't just a toy, it was a key. And Sam was beginning to suspect it unlocked a door he had to get through. Not just for her, but for him, too. By the time the sun came up, he knew what he had to do. His first stop wasn't the general store. It was the sheriff's office. He had a feeling this wasn't going to be a simple conversation. The morning sun did little to clean up the dusty, forgotten look of Silver Creek. Sam saddled his best gelding, Duke, and rode into town. He didn't tell the girl where he was going. She just watched him from the barn doorway, her eyes filled with a familiar wariness, as if she expected every departure to be permanent. He tied Duke outside the sheriff's office and stepped inside. The air was stale, smelling of old paper and indifference. Sheriff Amos Ridgway was a man who seemed to have been born tired. He sat with his boots propped up on a desk buried under a mountain of neglected paperwork. He looked up as Sam entered, a lazy grin spreading across his face. "Well now, Sam Harrive," Ridgway drawled, "to what do I owe the pleasure? One of your prize horses gets stolen?" "No," Sam said, his voice flat and cold as a river stone. "It's about Vernon Clay's stepdaughter." The sheriff's eyebrows went up, but the grin didn't fade. "Ah, the famous poker game. Heard about that. Seems to me you played your cards right, Sam. Can't say I blame you." He chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. Sam's jaw clenched so tight a muscle jumped. "I'm not here to brag. I'm here because a man used a child as a bargaining chip. In your town, in your saloon. What are you going to do about it?" Ridgway sighed, a long theatrical sound, and swung his boots off the desk. "Now, Sam, you know how these things are. The girl's his stepdaughter. No law against a man bringing his family to a card game. Was it ugly? Sure. But illegal? That's a different story. So you're telling me that's it?" Sam's voice was low, but it carried a dangerous edge. "You're just going to let it go?" "What I'm telling you," the sheriff said, leaning forward, his voice dropping, "is that you should be careful. You stirred up a hornet's nest. A man like Vernon, he doesn't just forget, he gets desperate, he gets mean. If you really care about that girl's safety, the last thing you want is the law sniffing around." Sam stared at him, a cold realization dawning. This wasn't just laziness. This was a warning. "He's not getting her back, Amos," Sam said, his voice a low growl. "Then you better have more than just a winning poker hand to stand on," Ridgway shot back. Right now, you're just a rich man who took a poor man's kid. In the eyes of the law, that doesn't look too good. You want to keep her? You better make it official. Otherwise, Vernon will have every right to come knocking, and I'll have to be the one standing behind him. The threat hung in the air between them, unspoken but crystal clear. The sheriff wasn't just indifferent. He was on Vernon's side. Sam turned without another word and walked out, his boots hitting the floorboards like hammers. The ride back to the ranch was a blur of dust and fury. He wasn't just angry at Vernon anymore. He was angry at a world that let men like Vernon and Ridgway run the show. When he got back, he found her by the paddock watching the horses. She looked so small against the vast, empty landscape. "Come inside," he said, his voice softer than he felt. "I have something for you." He led her to the guest room. He had cleaned it before he left, airing it out, fixing the loose curtain. The window looked out over the east pasture, and the afternoon sun filled the room with golden light. On the nightstand, he'd placed a small lamp and a new blank notebook with a freshly sharpened pencil. He stood in the doorway, watching her take it in. "This is your room," he said. She froze. Her eyes darted from the clean bed to his face, a look of utter disbelief on her features. She looked like a prisoner being told she was free, unable to process the words. "It's yours," he repeated, his voice firm. "No one can take it from you. Not him. Not me. No one." She took a hesitant step into the room. She didn't touch the bed. Instead, her eyes landed on the straw doll, which she'd left on the floor. She picked it up, ran her hand over its yarn hair, and then set it carefully on the pristine quilt. As if she were placing a queen on her throne. He started to turn away to give her space. "Why?" Her voice was a whisper, so quiet he almost missed it. He stopped, his hand on the doorframe. "Why what?" he asked, turning back. "Why are you doing this?" The question was a direct hit. He didn't have a simple answer. He had a dozen complicated ones. He thought about the scar under his belt, the empty rooms in his house, the failure he still tasted in the back of his throat from years ago. He settled on the only truth that mattered right now. "Because no one else did," he said. Her eyes met his, and for the first time, he saw something behind the fear. It was a tiny flicker of light in a vast darkness. A spark. That night, she didn't sleep in the barn. Sam saw the faint glow of the lamp from her window. He sat by his fire, a shotgun leaning against the wall beside him, not because he expected trouble tonight, but because he knew trouble was coming. Ridgway's words echoed in his head. Vernon will have every right to come knocking. This wasn't over. This was a chess game, and he had just made his first move. But Vernon and the sheriff were playing too. He looked out the window at the light in her room. He had to get ahead of them. He had to figure out what was so important about that girl, and more specifically, what was so important about that doll. He had a feeling the answer wasn't just about a drunk's pride. It was about something much bigger, something worth killing for. And Sam Harrov was starting to feel like he was the only thing standing in the way. The days that followed settled into a strange, quiet rhythm, a truce between two wounded souls. Sam started with the horses. He knew animals. He knew trust with an animal had to be earned, not demanded. He figured the same was true for a child. He led his gentlest mare, a sweet-tempered horse named Daisy, out into the paddock. "She won't hurt you," he told the girl, whose name he still didn't know. She stood by the fence, her arms wrapped around herself, a tiny fortress of fear. He didn't push. He just started brushing Daisy's coat, his movements slow and calm. He talked to the horse in a low, soothing voice. After a while, the girl took a hesitant step closer, then another. He held out the brush to her. "You try." She flinched, but she took it. Her first strokes were timid, barely touching the horse's flank. But Daisy leaned into the touch, letting out a soft nicker of approval. The girl's hand steadied. A rhythm emerged. brush, stroke, brush, stroke. For the first time since she'd arrived, the tension in her shoulders seemed to ease, just a fraction. Sam watched from a distance. He saw something in the way she focused on the simple task. It was an escape. In that moment, she wasn't Vernon Clay's stepdaughter. She wasn't the prize in a poker game. She was just a girl brushing a horse. Later, he found her sitting in her room. Not on the bed, but on the floor, the blank notebook open in her lap. She was holding the pencil, but she wasn't writing. She was just staring at the empty page, as if she didn't know what words were for. The straw doll sat on the pillow, watching her. Sam knocked softly on the doorframe. She looked up, startled. "I went to town," he said, holding up a small paper bag. "Bought you some things." He pulled out a new dress, a simple one of pale blue cotton, a pair of sturdy boots that would actually fit her, a bar of soap that smelled like lavender, and a small hand-held mirror. She stared at the items as he laid them on the bed, her eyes fixed on the mirror. She reached out a trembling hand and picked it up, staring at her own reflection, as if she were seeing a stranger. Who had this girl been told she was? What lies had been carved into her soul? That night, she came to the dinner table wearing the new dress. Her hair was still tangled, but it looked like she'd tried to run a comb through it. She sat down and ate a whole bowl of stew without him having to say a word. Progress. After dinner, he saw her on the porch, looking out at the endless fields. The straw doll was in her lap. He walked out and leaned against the railing beside her. "The horses," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "They're so quiet." "They talk," Sam replied. "You just have to learn how to listen." She looked up at him, and for the first time, he saw a flicker of a genuine smile touch her lips. It was gone as quickly as it came, but he'd seen it. It felt like watching the sun rise after a long, cold night. But his mind was still working. He'd seen something else, too. Earlier that day, when he'd walked past her room, he'd seen her with the doll. She wasn't just holding it. She was examining it. Her small fingers were tracing the stitched seams, pressing against the lumpy stuffing, as if she were searching for something. That wasn't how a child played with a toy. That was how a prisoner searched for a hidden key. That night, after she was asleep, Sam felt a pull he couldn't ignore. He walked through the silent house and up the stairs. Her door was slightly ajar. The lamp was out, but the moonlight streamed through the window, bathing the room in a silvery glow. She was asleep in the bed, a small lump under the quilt, and the straw doll lay on the floor where it had fallen. He hesitated for a heartbeat. This felt like a violation, a betrayal of the fragile trust he was trying to build. But Sheriff Ridgway's warning echoed in his mind. Vernon will have every right to come knocking. He had to know what he was up against. He crept into the room, his heart pounding in his chest. He picked up the doll. It was heavier than it looked, lumpy, uneven. He ran his fingers over the seams, just as he'd seen her do. He felt it, a hard, flat object nestled deep inside the stuffing. It was about the size of a deck of cards. His blood ran cold. This girl wasn't just running from an abusive stepfather. She was carrying something. Something Vernon Clay wanted back. Something the sheriff was willing to help him get. This wasn't about a child. It was about whatever was hidden inside this doll. Sam slipped the doll back onto the floor, right where he'd found it. He backed out of the room, his mind racing. He had thought he was offering a safe harbor. He was wrong. He had brought her into the middle of a war zone. And the first battle was coming. He could feel it in the air. A storm was gathering, and his ranch was about to become ground zero. The next few weeks were a delicate dance. Sam taught the girl, she'd finally whispered her name was Leora, how to ride Daisy. Not just in the paddock, but out in the open fields. He showed her the lay of the land, the creek beds that could hide a person from view, the quickest paths through the dense woods that bordered his property to the north. He told himself he was just giving her a taste of freedom. But he knew, deep down, he was training her. He was teaching her how to run, how to survive. Leora, for her part, blossomed under the open sky. The color returned to her cheeks. She laughed, real laughs that echoed across the pastures when Daisy tried to sneak a bite of an apple from her pocket. She was smart, a quick learner. She absorbed everything he taught her with a quiet intensity. But the doll was always there. It sat on her nightstand while she practiced writing her name in the notebook he'd given her. It lay beside her on the grass when they stopped for lunch under the big oak tree. She never whispered to it anymore, not that he saw, but she was always aware of it. It was her shadow, her constant companion. Sam never mentioned what he'd found inside. He waited. He watched. He knew Vernon would be back. Desperate men always came back. The day he came, the air was hot and heavy, threatening a thunderstorm. Sam was reinforcing a fence post on the far side of the property when he saw the plume of dust on the road. It was Vernon's rusted-out pickup truck, rattling toward the house like a harbinger of doom. Sam dropped his tools and swung onto Duke's back, urging the horse into a gallop. He had to get there first. He intercepted the truck at the main gate. Vernon slammed on the brakes, skidding to a halt just inches from the fence. He climbed out, his face even more gaunt and crazed than before. "Harov," he spat, his eyes darting past Sam toward the house. "I'm here for what's mine." "She's not yours, Vernon," Sam said, his voice dangerously calm. Duke shifted nervously beneath him, sensing the tension. "I ain't talking about the girl," Vernon sneered. "Though I'll be taking her too. I'm talking about my property, the little trinket her mama gave her. She's got it, and I want it back." There it was, the confirmation. It wasn't about Leora. It was about the doll. "You're not setting foot on my land," Sam said. "That's where you're wrong," Vernon said, a sick grin spreading across his face. He pulled a crumpled piece of paper from his pocket. "I got the law on my side this time." It was a court order, signed by a local judge, citing Vernon Clay's parental rights. It gave him legal authority to retrieve his stepdaughter and her personal belongings. And there, at the bottom, was a second signature. Sheriff Amos Ridgway. "The sheriff's on his way right now," Vernon gloated. "He's going to help me search the place, so you can either step aside or you can get arrested for obstruction. Your choice, rich man." Sam's mind raced. This was a trap. They'd planned this. They'd used the law to get their hands on the doll and on Leora. Once they had her off his property, she would disappear, and whatever secret she was carrying would disappear with her. He looked past Vernon, toward the house. Leora was on the porch, frozen, her face pale with terror. He had to make a choice. Fight them here and lose in a court of law, or play a different game. "All right, Vernon," Sam said, his voice changing, becoming resigned. "You win. Let me just go get her ready." Vernon's eyes widened in surprise, then narrowed in suspicion. "No tricks, Harov." "No tricks," Sam said, turning Duke back toward the house. "You have the law on your side. What can I do?" He rode back to the porch, his face a mask of defeat. Leora stared at him, her eyes wide with betrayal. "Get your things," Sam said, his voice loud enough for Vernon to hear. "Just the essentials." He helped her down from the porch, his hand on her arm. He leaned in close, his voice a barely audible whisper against her ear. "The east pasture. Follow the creek to the woods. Don't stop running until you reach the old hunter's cabin. You remember where it is?" She nodded, a tiny, almost imperceptible movement. "Go now," he whispered. "Don't look back." He gave her a gentle shove toward the side of the house. For a second, she hesitated. Then she ran. A small, fleeting shadow disappearing into the tall grass. Sam turned to face Vernon, who was now walking toward him, a triumphant smirk on his face. Behind him, another cloud of dust was rising. The sheriff was arriving. "Where is she?" Vernon demanded. "She's scared," Sam said, stalling. "Give her a minute." The sheriff's car pulled up. Ridgway got out, his hand resting on the butt of his pistol. "Everything all right here, Sam?" he asked, his voice dripping with false concern. He won't give her up, Vernon snarled. Now, Sam, Ridgway said, walking closer. Let's not make this difficult. The judge was very clear. Sam looked from the corrupt sheriff to the desperate drunk. He had bought her a few minutes, maybe 5 at most. It wasn't enough. He needed more time. She's not here, Sam said simply. Vernon's face contorted with rage. You're lying. Am I? Sam said, a slow, cold smile spreading across his face. You have a court order for the girl and her belongings, but the girl is gone, and as for her belongings... He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the straw doll. Vernon's eyes locked onto it like a starving wolf spotting a rabbit. He lunged for it. I don't think so, Sam said, holding it just out of reach. This is evidence, in the matter of your abuse and neglect of a child. I think maybe we need a different judge to look at this case. The sheriff's face went pale. He hadn't expected this. He'd expected a simple retrieval, not a legal fight. Give me the doll, Sam, Ridgway said, his voice hard. No, Sam replied. I'll be taking this into a federal court in the next county, along with a sworn statement about a certain sheriff who conspires with child abusers. He had them. They were trapped between their greed and the law they had tried to twist. But then Vernon did something no one expected. He pulled a small, rusty pistol from his waistband. Give it to me! He shrieked, his voice cracking. Give it to me now! The game had just changed. It wasn't about legal threats anymore. It was about survival, and Sam was still holding the doll. The world seemed to slow down. The sheriff, a coward at his core, took a step back, his hand hovering over his own gun but not drawing it. He wanted the contents of the doll, but he didn't want a murder charge. Vernon, however, had nothing left to lose. His eyes were wild, his hand shaking as he pointed the rusty pistol at Sam's chest. I ain't asking again, Harriv, he hissed. Sam looked at the gun. Then he looked at Vernon's desperate, frantic face. He wasn't just after a treasure. He was terrified. Someone else was behind this. Someone Vernon was more afraid of than he was of Sam. Sam had to end this. Now. He tossed the doll, not to Vernon, but high in the air, toward the barn. It was a stupid move, a desperate gambit, but it was the only one he had. As expected, Vernon's eyes followed the doll. For a split second, his attention was diverted. That's all Sam needed. He lunged forward, not at Vernon, but at the sheriff. He slammed into Ridgway, sending them both tumbling to the dust. The sheriff's gun clattered away on the hard-packed earth. A shot rang out. Vernon had fired, but his shot went wild, embedding itself in the wooden porch railing. Sam scrambled for the sheriff's dropped pistol. His fingers closed around the cold steel just as Vernon turned the gun back on him. "Drop it!" Ridgway yelled, crawling away like a crab. Sam didn't have time to aim. He rolled and fired from the ground. His shot hit Vernon in the shoulder. The man screamed, a high-pitched animal sound, and dropped his pistol. He staggered back, clutching his arm, blood already seeping through his filthy shirt. Silence descended. Heavy, suffocating. Sam got to his feet, the sheriff's gun steady in his hand, pointed directly at Vernon. "It's over," Sam said, his voice ragged. From the road, 2 of Sam's ranch hands, drawn by the gunshots, came running, rifles in hand. They flanked him, their faces grim. The odds had just shifted dramatically. The sheriff, seeing his advantage gone, raised his hands. "Now hold on, Sam. Let's not be hasty." "Get off my property, Amos," Sam growled. "Take this piece of trash with you. And if I ever see either of you near here again, I won't wait for you to draw first." The threat was absolute. Ridgway, his face pale and sweaty, knew it was real. He scrambled to his feet, grabbed the whimpering Vernon by his good arm, and dragged him toward his car. They sped away, leaving a cloud of shame and dust behind them. Sam stood there, his chest heaving, the borrowed gun still hot in his hand. One of the ranch hands retrieved the straw doll from where it had landed near the barn. He handed it to Sam without a word. Sam stared at it. This little, insignificant toy had almost gotten them all killed. What in God's name was inside it? He turned and looked toward the east pasture. Leora was out there, alone and scared, running for a cabin in the woods. He had to get to her. He had to tell her she was safe, but he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that she wasn't. This wasn't just about Vernon and a crooked sheriff anymore. Vernon was a puppet. Someone else was pulling the strings. Someone with power. Someone who wanted what was in this doll so badly they were willing to send men with guns to get it. He had won the battle, but the war was just beginning, and he had no idea who his real enemy was. He had to find out, and he had to do it fast. He looked at the doll in his hand. There was only one way. It was time to see what secret Leora had been protecting. Sam didn't go after Leora right away. First, he sent his most trusted ranch hand, a quiet man named Jeb, to ride the perimeter. "Shoot anyone who isn't one of us," Sam ordered. The words tasted like ash in his mouth. Then he went into the house, into the quiet solitude of his study. He locked the door. He placed the straw doll on his heavy oak desk. For a moment, he just stared at it. This shabby, handmade thing. What secret could be worth so much blood and fear? He took a deep breath and picked up a small pocket knife. With trembling hands, he carefully slit the stitches along the doll's side. The coarse stuffing spilled out onto the desk, and with it, the hard, flat object he had felt before. It was a small oilskin pouch, tied shut with a leather thong. It was old, the material worn smooth with time. His heart pounded against his ribs as he untied the knot. Inside, there were two things. The first was a folded piece of paper, a legal document. It was a land deed, a deed for the property directly bordering his own to the south, the Montgomery place. It had been one of the biggest ranches in the county until the family had died in a fire 10 years ago. The deed wasn't in the Montgomerys' name. It was made out to their sole heir, a daughter, Eleanora Montgomery, Leora. Sam sank into his chair, the blood draining from his face. It all clicked into place. Vernon hadn't been her stepfather. He was her kidnapper. The fire hadn't been an accident. It was murder. Vernon, a disgraced ranch hand the Montgomerys had fired, had stolen their child and the deed to their land, waiting for her to come of age so he could force her to sign it over. But there was something else in the pouch, a small, tarnished silver locket. He opened it. Inside were two tiny, faded photographs. On one side was a handsome, smiling couple, the Montgomerys, he presumed. On the other side was a picture of a younger Sam Harrov. He was standing with the Montgomerys, his arm around Mr. Montgomery's shoulder. They were all laughing. It was taken the year before the fire, the year before everything went to hell. A memory slammed into him, one he had buried for a decade, a promise he had made to his friend and neighbor, Thomas Montgomery. "If anything ever happens to me, Sam, you look out for my family. You promise me." He had promised. And then the fire had happened. The official story was a lantern knocked over in the barn. By the time Sam saw the smoke and got there, the house was an inferno. They told him everyone was gone. Thomas, his wife, and their little girl. He had believed them. He had failed them. He stared at his own smiling face in the locket, and a wave of nausea and self-loathing washed over him. He hadn't just rescued a random girl. He had, by some impossible twist of fate, found the child he had sworn to protect. This wasn't about a poker game. This wasn't about loneliness. This was about redemption. A sharp knock on the study door snapped him out of his trance. "Boss, it's Jeb." Sam quickly stuffed the deed and locket back into his pocket and unlocked the door. Jeb's face was grim. "Found tracks, by the East Creek. Not the girls. A man on horseback. He was following her." Sam's blood ran cold. Vernon and the sheriff left in a car. "This wasn't them," Jeb said. "This was someone else. A professional. The puppet master, the one who had sent Vernon. They hadn't trusted their pawn to get the job done. They had a backup plan. And that backup plan was now hunting Leora in the woods." "Saddle the horses," Sam commanded, his voice a low, vicious growl. "All of them were going after her." As he strode toward the barn, the weight of his failure pressed down on him. but something else was rising to meet it. A cold, hard fury he hadn't felt in years. He had failed the Montgomerys once. He had let their daughter live in hell for 10 years because he hadn't looked hard enough, hadn't questioned the official story. He would not fail her again. They had sent a wolf after his lamb. But they had forgotten one thing. Sam Harrove was a sleeping grizzly bear, and they had just kicked the den. The forest was a maze of shadows and silence. Sam rode Duke hard, his ranch hands fanning out behind him, their rifles ready. They were moving fast, but Sam knew the man they were hunting was skilled. He'd be moving silently, leaving as little trace as possible. He was a predator. Leora was his prey. Sam's mind was a maelstrom of guilt and rage. Eleanor Montgomery. He'd held her as a baby. He'd bounced her on his knee, and for 10 years he hadn't even known she was alive, suffering at the hands of the man who had murdered her parents. He pushed the guilt down. It was fuel. He would use it. They found the trail near the creek bed. A single, clear hoof print, deeper than it should be, meaning the horse was carrying a heavy man, and it was fresh. "He's close," Jeb whispered, pointing. Sam urged Duke forward, his eyes scanning the dense undergrowth. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig sent a jolt of adrenaline through him. Was it Leora? Or was it the hunter? They followed the tracks deeper into the woods, toward the old hunter's cabin. It was a derelict structure, barely standing, but it was the only shelter for miles. It was where she would go. It was where the hunter would be waiting. As they neared the clearing where the cabin stood, Sam held up a hand, signaling for his men to halt. He dismounted, moving with a stealth that belied his size. "Circle around," he whispered to Jeb. "Come in from the north. No shooting unless I do." Jeb nodded and melted back into the trees with half the men. Sam crept forward, the sheriff's pistol now tucked into his belt, his own heavy rifle in his hands. He could see the cabin now, a dark shape against the fading light. There was a horse tied to a tree nearby. Not Daisy. A big black stallion. The hunter was here. Sam's heart was a cold, heavy stone in his chest. Was he too late? He moved to the side of the cabin, pressing his back against the rough, decaying logs. He peered through a grimy, broken window pane, and he saw them. Leora was backed into a corner, her face streaked with tears and dirt. The straw doll lay ripped open on the floor nearby. Standing over her was a man Sam had never seen before. He was tall and dressed in dark, practical clothing. He had the cold, dead eyes of a killer for hire. He held a long, wicked-looking knife in his hand. "The deed is not in the doll," the man said, his voice calm, chillingly devoid of emotion. "The drunk lied, so you're going to tell me where it is, or I am going to start cutting pieces off of you until you do." Leora just shook her head, sobbing, unable to speak. "Wrong answer," the man said, taking a step closer. Sam didn't hesitate. He kicked the cabin door off its rusty hinges. It exploded inward with a crash of splintering wood. The hunter spun around, surprised, his knife flashing up. "Drop it!" Sam snarled, his rifle leveled at the man's heart. The man's eyes widened for a fraction of a second. He wasn't expecting this. He wasn't expecting a rancher to move with the speed and fury of a cornered wolf. But he didn't drop the knife. He was a professional. He didn't panic. Instead, he moved with blinding speed, grabbing Leora and pulling her in front of him as a shield. He pressed the knife to her throat. "Drop the rifle, rancher," the man hissed, "or the girl dies." It was a standoff. Sam's men were outside, but they couldn't get a clear shot. It was just him, the killer, and the girl whose life he had sworn to protect. "Let her go," Sam said, his voice a low growl. "This is between you and me." "I don't think so," the killer replied, a thin, cruel smile touching his lips. "My employer wants the deed. He said the girl was expendable, so you have one choice. Give me the deed, or I kill her and find it on your corpse." His employer, the puppet master. "Who sent you?" Sam demanded. The killer laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "You're not in a position to ask questions." Sam's eyes flickered from the knife at Leora's throat to the killer's cold, confident face. He was trapped. If he gave him the deed, they would both be killed. If he didn't, Leora would die right now. He saw the terror in Leora's eyes, the same terror she must have felt the night her parents were murdered. And in that moment, Sam Harov made a decision. He wasn't going to fail her again. "The deed's in my pocket," Sam said, slowly lowering the rifle. "You can have it. Just let her go." The killer's eyes gleamed with triumph. "Put the rifle on the floor, then kick it over to me." Sam did as he was told. The heavy rifle slid across the dusty floorboards. "Now the pistol in your belt," the killer commanded. Sam slowly pulled the sheriff's pistol out and placed it on the floor. "Good," the killer said, a smug look on his face. "Now, the deed." Sam reached slowly into his jacket pocket, but he didn't pull out the oilskin pouch. He pulled out the tarnished silver locket. He held it up. "This is what you're really after, isn't it?" The killer's eyes narrowed in confusion. "What is that?" "It's proof," Sam said. "Proof of who she is. Proof of who you work for." He tossed the locket onto the floor. It landed with a soft clink, springing open. Just as he'd planned, the killer's gaze flickered downward for a single fatal instant. Sam moved. He didn't go for the guns. He dove forward, low and fast, and slammed his shoulder into the killer's knees. The man grunted, his balance broken. The knife wavered, nicking Leora's neck, drawing a thin line of blood. She screamed. The killer stumbled backward, shoving Leora away from him. He raised the knife, his face a mask of fury, ready to lunge at Sam. But Leora didn't just cower. The fear in her eyes had been replaced by a white-hot rage. She grabbed a loose floorboard from the rotten cabin floor, a thick, heavy piece of oak, and swung it with all her might. It connected with the back of the killer's head with a sickening crack. His eyes rolled back in his skull. He dropped the knife and crumpled to the floor, unconscious. Silence. Sam scrambled to his feet, grabbing the rifle. He looked at Leora, who stood there, trembling, the heavy piece of wood still in her hands. "You did it," Sam breathed, his voice filled with awe. "You saved us." She dropped the wood and stared at the unconscious man, then at the thin trickle of blood on her neck. Then she looked at Sam, and she collapsed into his arms, sobbing. Great, shuddering sobs of terror and relief. Sam held her tight, his own body trembling with the aftermath of the fight. He had her. She was safe. But as his men rushed into the cabin, he knew this was far from over. The killer was just a soldier. The king was still on the board, and Sam finally knew who he was. There was only one man in the county with the power to orchestrate all of this. The man who had investigated the Montgomery fire and ruled it an accident. The man who owned the judge who signed Vernon's court order. The man whose name was synonymous with power and corruption in this part of the state. The mayor, Mayor Thompson. The same man whose carelessness with a horse had caused the accident that had left Sam scarred and sterile all those years ago. It hadn't been an accident. None of it had. It was all connected. And Sam was going to burn his entire kingdom to the ground. They tied the unconscious hunter to a chair in Sam's study. Jeb, his face grim, tended to the cut on Leora's neck. It was shallow, a scratch more than a wound, but it was a terrifying symbol of how close she'd come to death. Sam stood over the hunter, whose name they'd learned from a wallet was Marcus Thorne, a former Pinkerton agent with a reputation for ruthless efficiency. "Wake him up," Sam said. Jeb tossed a bucket of cold water in Thorne's face. He sputtered awake, his cold eyes instantly assessing the situation. He was a professional. He showed no fear. "You're a long way from home, Thorne," Sam said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Mayor Thompson doesn't have any power out here. You're on my land now, and my laws are the only ones that matter." Thorne remained silent, his jaw tight. "I know he hired you to get the deed," Sam continued. "I know he hired Vernon Clay years ago to kill the Montgomerys and snatch their daughter. What I want to know is why. Why that piece of land? It's no better than any other ranch in this county." Thorne just stared at him with contempt. "You don't have to talk to me," Sam said, turning to Leora. Maybe you'll talk to her. She's the one you put a knife to. She's the one whose family you helped destroy. Leora, her eyes blazing with a newfound fire, stepped forward. My father. He trusted you people. He trusted the mayor. Still, Thorn was silent. A stone wall. Fine, Sam said. He picked up the oilskin pouch containing the deed and the locket. He walked over to the fireplace where a low fire was burning. If you won't tell me why this is so important, then it must not be worth much. He held the pouch over the flames. Wait! Thorn yelled, panic finally breaking through his icy composure. Don't! You have no idea what you're doing! Then tell me, Sam commanded. Thorn hesitated, his mind racing. He was trapped. His employer would kill him if he talked. Sam would kill him if he didn't. The land, Thorn finally croaked, his voice raspy. It's not about the land, it's about what's under it. Sam paused, the pouch still in his hand. Go on. The railroad, Thorn said. Thompson got word years ago. The Transcontinental is planning a new spur line. It's going to cut right through this territory. The official route is still a secret, but Thompson has a source on the inside. The most profitable route. The one that will make the man who owns the land the richest man in the state, goes straight through the Montgomery property. It all made a horrible kind of sense. The greed, the murder, the years of deception. All for a line on a map that hadn't even been drawn yet. He needed the land, Sam said, piecing it together. But Thomas Montgomery wouldn't sell. He was too honest, so Thompson had him removed. He hired Clay to set the fire and get the girl, Thorn admitted, his voice low. The plan was for Clay to lay low for years, raise the girl, and then force her to sign the deed over to a company owned by Thompson. But Clay got greedy. He heard you were looking for him and he panicked. He tried to get the deed for himself. And you were the cleanup crew, Sam finished. Thorn nodded, defeated. A heavy silence filled the room. Leora stared at Thorn, not with fear, but with a cold, hard judgment. She had grown up in an instant. The victim was gone. In her place was the last of the Montgomerys, and she was ready for justice. What now? Jeb asked, looking at Sam. We can't take him to the sheriff. The mayor owns the whole county. Sam looked at Leora. He saw the strength in her eyes, the resilience he never could have imagined. He had been trying to protect her, but in the end, she had helped save herself. No, Sam said. We're not going to the law. We're going to be the law. He had a plan. It was audacious. It was dangerous. It would either work perfectly, or it would get them all killed. Jeb, Sam said, go into town, quietly, spread the word, tell every small rancher, every farmer, every shopkeeper who Mayor Thompson has squeezed and cheated over the years. Tell them to meet at the town hall at noon tomorrow. Tell them Sam Harrove has proof that will set them all free. Jeb's eyes widened. That's calling him out. He'll come down on you with everything he has. I'm counting on it, Sam said, a grim smile on his face. Then he turned to Leora. Are you ready for this? She stood up, her small frame straight and tall. She walked over to the desk and picked up the deed. Her deed. He took my home, she said, her voice clear and strong. He took my parents. He took my name. I'm not going to let him take anything else. Sam felt a surge of pride so fierce it almost buckled his knees. This was no longer just his fight. It was theirs. Tomorrow at noon, the entire town would be watching. It would be Sam Harrove and the lost Montgomery heir against the most powerful man in the state. There would be a reckoning in Silver Creek, and the ground was going to shake. The morning sun rose on a town holding its breath. By 10 o'clock, the main street of Silver Creek was filling up, not with the usual bustle of commerce, but with quiet, grim-faced men and women. Farmers whose water rights had been stolen, ranchers who'd been squeezed out by Thompson's predatory land grabs, shopkeepers forced to pay crippling fees to his cronies. They stood in small, silent groups, their eyes fixed on the town hall. They had heard Sam Harrove's call. They had come for a glimmer of hope. Inside his ranch house, Sam was preparing for war. He wasn't polishing a gun, he was going over the plan with Leora and Jeb. "He'll have men on the rooftops," Jeb said, pacing the study. "He'll have the sheriff and his deputies blocking the doors." "I know," Sam said calmly, "but he'll want to do this himself. His ego won't let anyone else be the one to crush me. He'll want to be on that stage looking down on me when his men take me away." "What about Thorne?" Leora asked. The hired killer was still tied to the chair, a gag in his mouth. "He's our ace in the hole," Sam said. He turned to Jeb. "You have the wagon ready?" Jeb nodded. "Covered, just like you said. Parked behind the livery stable." Sam looked at Leora. Her face was pale, but her eyes were steady. She was wearing the simple blue dress he'd bought her, but she wore it like armor. In her hand, she clutched the oilskin pouch. "You don't have to do this," he said softly. "You can stay here, where it's safe." "You said this was my home," she replied, her voice unwavering. "I'm not going to hide in it. I'm going to fight for it." At 11:30, they rode into town. Not in a wagon, but on horseback. Sam on Duke, Leora on Daisy. They rode slowly, deliberately, down the center of the main street. The crowd parted for them, a silent sea of weathered faces. They saw Sam Harov, a man they respected. And they saw the girl beside him, the ghost of the Montgomerys, returned to claim what was hers. As expected, Sheriff Ridgway and a dozen heavily armed deputies stood on the steps of the town hall, blocking the entrance. Mayor Thompson stood at the top of the steps, a smug, confident smile on his face. He was a big man, soft and fleshy, dressed in an expensive suit that looked out of place in the dusty town. "Harov!" he boomed, his voice full of false bonhomie. "What is the meaning of this circus? You've disrupted the entire town." "I'm here to see justice done, Thompson," Sam called out, his voice ringing through the silent street. "Something this town hasn't seen since you took office." The mayor laughed. "Justice? You, a kidnapper who abducted a poor, innocent girl, you talk of justice? Sheriff, arrest this man." Ridgway and his deputies started down the steps, their hands on their guns. The crowd murmured, shifting uneasily. This was it. It was going to end in bloodshed. "Before you do," Sam said, holding up a hand, "let the people hear what I have to say. Let them hear the truth about you. Or are you afraid of a few words?" He was playing to Thompson's ego, and it worked. The mayor held up a hand, stopping his men. He wanted this public victory. He wanted to humiliate Sam before destroying him. "Let him speak," Thompson said with a wave of his hand. "Let's all hear the ravings of a madman." Sam dismounted. He walked to the foot of the steps, Leora right beside him. He faced the crowd, his voice strong and clear. "For 10 years, he began, we were all told that the Montgomery family died in a tragic fire. We were told it was an accident. That was a lie." A gasp went through the crowd. "The fire was murder," Sam declared. "Set by a man named Vernon Clay, on the orders of the man who wanted their land. The man who knew the railroad was coming. The man who stood to make millions while the rest of you lost everything." He pointed a finger straight at the mayor. "That man is Mayor Thompson." Thompson's face turned purple with rage. "This is slander! Lies!" "Is it?" Sam replied. He turned to Leora. "The murderers thought they had killed the entire family. But they missed one. They missed the daughter, Eleanora Montgomery." He put his hand on Leora's shoulder. "She is here. She survived. She has spent the last 10 years as a prisoner of the man who killed her parents, and she is ready to claim what is hers." Leora stepped forward. Her voice, though not as loud as Sam's, was sharp and clear as a bell. She held up the oilskin pouch. "My parents were murdered for this," she said, "for a deed to land that was rightfully ours. Mayor Thompson, you are a thief and a killer, and your time is over." The crowd erupted. The quiet murmurs turned into angry shouts. "Liar! Thief! Murderer!" Thompson was stunned. He had lost control of the narrative. "Arrest them!" he shrieked at the sheriff, his voice cracking. "Shoot them if you have to!" Ridgway and his deputies drew their guns. But then, something happened that no one expected. From the back of the livery stable, a covered wagon rumbled out into the main street. It came to a halt right behind the crowd. Jeb leaped down from the driver's seat and threw back the canvas cover. Inside, tied to a chair, was Marcus Thorne, the hired killer. "This man," Jeb yelled, his voice carrying across the square, "is Marcus Thorne! He was hired by Mayor Thompson to silence the Montgomery girl for good. He's ready to tell a federal marshal everything he knows." The crowd gasped. This was a witness. This was real proof. The sheriff and his deputies froze. They were enforcers, not fanatics. They were paid to bully farmers, not get into a firefight with the entire town, especially not with a federal witness in the mix. Mayor Thompson saw the tide turn. He saw the faces of his deputies waver. He saw the hatred in the eyes of the crowd. He was finished. In a blind panic, he did the only thing a cornered rat can do. He ran. He shoved his way through his own deputies and scrambled down the side steps, running for his horse tied up in the alley. But Sam was ready. He whistled, a sharp, piercing sound. From the other end of the alley, two of his ranch hands appeared, leading a horse. Daisy. Leora vaulted into the saddle with a grace and speed that stunned everyone. She was no longer a victim. She was a Harrow-trained rider. She was a Montgomery, defending her legacy. She spurred Daisy into the alley, cutting off the mayor's escape. Thompson skidded to a halt, trapped. He turned, his face a mask of terror and desperation, and saw Sam walking calmly toward him. It was over. There was nowhere left to run. "It wasn't my fault," Thompson whimpered, backing away. "The fire. It was Clay. He went too far." "You gave the order," Sam said, his voice cold as the grave. "You destroyed a family. You destroyed this town, all for a patch of dirt." He stopped a few feet from the trembling mayor. He didn't raise a fist. He didn't need to. The crowd was surging into the alley now, their faces filled with a decade of suppressed rage. They surrounded the mayor, a silent, judging jury. Sheriff Ridgway, seeing which way the wind was blowing, suddenly found his courage. "Mayor Thompson," he said, his voice shaking but official, "you're under arrest." Sam watched as they led the disgraced mayor away through a crowd that spat and cursed at him. He looked at Thorne, now being guarded by a half-dozen grim-faced ranchers. He looked at Leora, sitting tall on Daisy's back, a look of quiet, powerful victory on her face. He had done it. He had kept his promise. He walked over to Leora and looked up at her. The scared, silent girl he'd won in a poker game was gone forever. In her place was a strong young woman who had faced down monsters and won. "It's over," he said. She slid down from the horse, and right there in the middle of the street, in front of the whole town, she wrapped her arms around his neck. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you, Dad." Sam froze, the word hitting him with the force of a physical blow, a word he never, ever thought he would hear. He hugged her back, his eyes closing as a weight he'd been carrying for 13 years finally, blessedly, lifted. The sun was setting, painting the Kansas sky in brilliant shades of orange and gold. The Harrow Ranch was quiet, the only sounds the gentle nicker of the horses and the chirp of crickets. Sam and Leora sat on the porch steps, watching the colors fade. The town was still buzzing. Mayor Thompson, Sheriff Ridgway, and their whole corrupt enterprise had been dismantled. Federal marshals had arrived, and with Thorne's confession and the deed as evidence, the case was airtight. Leora Montgomery had her name back, and her land. But here, on the ranch, there was only peace. "What happens now?" she asked softly. "Now," Sam said, "you get to live. You can go to school. You can run the Montgomery Ranch. You can do anything you want. You're free." She was silent for a long moment, leaning her head against his shoulder. "I'm already where I want to be," she said. "This is my home. You're my family." Sam's throat felt tight. He had started this journey to atone for a failure, to soothe a lonely ache in his own heart. He never imagined he would find this. He never imagined his empty house could be filled with so much life. He thought about the scar, the symbol of what he had lost. But it didn't hurt anymore. It was just a part of his story, the path that had, against all odds, led him here. To her. Mine too, he said, his voice rough with emotion. He had won a girl in a poker game, a broken, silent child clutching a straw doll. He had thought he was saving her. But in the end, she was the one who had saved him. Together, they had faced down the ghosts of the past and built a future neither of them had dared to dream of. The road ahead was unwritten, but for the first time, it stretched out before them, bright and full of promise. If you enjoyed this story and believe that justice can be found in the most unexpected places, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. You never know what secrets are hiding in plain sight.